highly emotional sense of relief was almost palpable when hundreds of post office branch managers, wrongly convicted of embezzling money, learned today they will be exonerated and compensated. They heard the Prime Minister tell MPs that they had been the victims of one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. Their names could be cleared by the end of the year, and although the legislation being introduced to end the long years of anguish and injustice will only apply in England and Wales, Scotland tonight said it would follow suit. Yet even though justice has eventually triumphed, serious questions remain, questions about why the Post Office refused to believe the problem could lie with its flawed IT system, and why it needed a powerful ITV drama to help right this terrible wrong.
The Post Office scandal has gone on for nearly 25 years. Legal routes to justice have been slow and limited. But the ITV drama Mr. Bates versus the Post Office has turbocharged the issue. And today the Prime Minister came to Parliament to announce a dramatic intervention in processes that are normally the preserve of the courts.
This is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. I can announce that we will introduce new primary legislation to make sure that those convicted as a result of the Horizon scandal are swiftly exonerated and compensated.
People lost their lives, their liberty and their livelihood, and they've been waiting far too long for the truth, for justice and for compensation. So I'm glad the Prime Minister is putting forward a proposal.
The government will introduce a law exonerating hundreds of convicted sub-postmasters in England and Wales in one fell swoop. Once convictions are overturned, they will be eligible for £600,000 compensation payments so long as they are willing to sign a statement of innocence, which can be held against anyone who later turns out to be genuinely guilty. The Justice Secretary admitting those cases will exist.
We have to be clear, there will be some guilty people who effectively get a windfall acquittal as a result of this. Now, one remembers the William Blackstone quote, better that 10 guilty men escape than one innocent person is made to suffer.
Not all the victims of the scandal are happy. Joe Hamilton, who was depicted in the ITV drama, thinks a £75,000 offer to a group who exposed Post Office wrongdoing through a legal action is far too little.
If it wasn't for this group, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. They have had almost nothing, and I think that's shameful. They just need a chunk of money to help them see out what's left of their lives or rebuild their lives for the younger people, you know, because we've been trashed.
Campaigners are also focusing on Fujitsu, the company which supplied the faulty Post Office system.
Fujitsu was the organisation, the company, that was doing the alteration of sub-postmasters' accounts without telling the sub-postmasters that they were doing that, without keeping a record of what they were doing, and while denying that they could do it.
ITV's drama had a massive impact on what happened here today.
One day you'll find your precious lawyers and we'll get the scandal into court.
And the director was in Parliament to witness it.
It's quite an astonishing thing to see the impact of what we did, and that it's only 10 days since we've broadcast the show, and to see tangible, hopefully, change to rectifying these wrongs is quite unbelievable.
But with the public inquiry still hard at work, the saga isn't over yet. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Westminster.
The Post Office computer scandal goes way back to 1999, the year when the rollout began of its new accounting system, Horizon, designed by Fujitsu. Many lives were ruined as a result. Some sub-postmasters died without ever seeing justice, which might help explain why there was anger and bitterness mixed in with the triumph and delight at today's announcement.
This is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history.
These are just some of the hundreds of Post Office workers who today finally got their message delivered. Listening to the Prime Minister in Scarborough was Lee Castleton. His story needs no dramatising, but he's played in the ITV series.
This is the 91st time I've called you about these shortfalls.
Now his story may finally have an ending.
I'm glad that things are moving swiftly. I just worry that the exoneration is going to be a sweeping across the board, and that people, having been taken to court individually and their names splashed all over the local presses as being criminals, basically, don't get the chance to be heard as individuals.
It's 21 years of my life I've lost.
In South London, Parmod Kalia was wrongly accused of stealing £22,000 and sent to prison. He's still checking that he qualifies for compensation. The government assured me he will, though the bigger win is the trust of his daughter and her siblings, who once questioned him.
They doubted me. They actually asked me the question, Dad, have you taken the money? I had no answers. I didn't blame the computer system because I didn't think it was a computer system. I just said no, but I don't know what's happened to it, where it's gone. When we were watching the drama together, she actually apologised to me. She apologised, said, sorry, we doubted you.
That must have meant a huge amount to you.
I did say to her, you don't need to apologise. It was not your wrongdoing, but thank you anyway. And now they believe that I didn't take the money. I'm not a thief.
Some, like Karen in Hampshire, are still coming forward following the ITV drama, unsure if they qualify. She tried to balance the books using £62,000 of her own savings, but was still sentenced to a year in prison.
Feeling like driving into the Central Reservation on the motorway on the way home on a Wednesday night, some of the time. That's what I felt like. I had my grandson, he was 8, and he was bullied at school, and everyone knew once it was in the paper. And it was harder for my family because they were there facing it. I was in prison.
Everyone we spoke to said exoneration and compensation will help, but money can't make up for the misery of so many lives ruined.
Well, as we said last night, the incredible thing about this is the way no one in a position of power sought to question the basic premise that small post offices up and down the country turned out to be absolute hotbeds of crime, rammed with hundreds and hundreds of cunning thieves. An idea so transparently ludicrous, it's a miracle anyone took it seriously. Now, Paul and Robert are here to talk about all this. Paul, I'm tempted to ask you what next, the bank-robbing librarians or the jewel thief church wardens, but let's stick to the job at hand. Is it fair to say that quite a lot of the victims are not entirely happy with this?
Yeah, and I think the difficult question here is what price do you put on a life? Sadly, some lives have been lost during this scandal, and tragically those people, of course, can't be compensated. But what price do you put on those lives ruined as well by this scandal? Today, the government has attempted to do that, £600,000 for those wrongly convicted, whose convictions will be quashed, but £75,000 if you haven't been convicted but you've been caught up in the scandal and taken group legal action against the post office. It's that figure which some people feel is too low, because some of those people had to pay back tens of thousands of pounds to the post office that they had been alleged to have taken.
And their lives were ruined, as we saw in the drum.
Exactly. And then when you start to compare what they're getting with the extraordinary profits that people have made out of the Horizon programme, that's when things really start to jar. So Paula Vennells, £4.5 million for her time at the post office. One of the top executives at Fujitsu in the UK last year got £1.2 million before bonuses, as far as I can see. So again, tonight it's the people who've profited from Horizon who are, by multiples, far better off than those who've been wronged by this scandal, even after they've been compensated.
It doesn't feel like that'll be the end of that particular one, does it? But Paul, thank you very much. Let's go to Robert, who, as you can see, is just recorded his Peston programme, always worth watching. I would definitely stay up for it tonight. Robert, where does this go? I mean, to what extent do we think that people will be held accountable for all this?
So there is a statutory inquiry going on. I was very struck. I've just interviewed, actually, Alex Chalk, the Lord Chancellor, for the programme. And one of the things I was really struck by was him making the point that it's really important that anybody who's proved to be culpable for this grotesque miscarriage of justice should make a contribution to the costs of restitution. I've done a back-of-envelope calculation on the amount of money that's likely to go to sub-postmasters who have been wrongly convicted, and it's pretty easy to come up with a figure of about £1 billion of taxpayers' money. Now, frankly, if this was the fault of, to an extent, the contractor Fujitsu, which has been paid something like £2.5 billion by the state-owned firm, the Post Office, then there are many who believe that Fujitsu should hand over a ton of money. Now, it was quite interesting to me that Alex Chalk said, yes, absolutely, if Fujitsu was found to be culpable, yes, they should make contributions. And he even made the point that he thought it was unlikely that the statutory inquiry would clear Fujitsu. Now, Fujitsu is saying they can't say anything until the inquiry is completed, but they are a huge multinational firm. They do enormous amounts of work for the rest of government. They have very deep pockets. And so there must be a reasonable prospect that, at least in their case, some money is handed over to taxpayers that, of course, then, as I say, gets through to the people who really deserve it, who are these sub-postmasters. But then there's another point. Throughout this period, the Post Office claimed to be being returned to profit. The Horizon scheme was part of a modernisation scheme. That's why these big bonuses were handed out to the boss, for example, of this company. But we now know, because of the scale of the compensation that's going to have to be awarded to these people, that turning round of the Post Office was an illusion, because these are real costs for the Post Office. And so the other question, as you know, Paul has been alluding to, is if the Post Office, and that now seems to be the case, actually was broadly in underlying terms in loss all this period because of the disaster of how this Horizon system was, is there a mechanism for getting that money back from the bosses who profited?
Robert, fascinating stuff. Thank you very much indeed.